Good evening and welcome to Jazz at the Library. My name is Joe Lazama and I'm the board president for JazzFresno. A few announcements before we start the presentation. So this Thursday we have two jazz events going on. One is a big band. The Joe Lenigan Big Band will be at the Rivendell Event Center. This actually happens every third Thursday of the month. So if you miss it this month, it'll be happening as well next month. They do a 2-hour gig, taking a break in the middle, cost, and they're trying to cater to big band lovers and dancers. So there's a little bit of both there. So there's dancing available. If you're not inclined to dance, then go listen. But the cost, unlike Jazz at the Library, there's a $15 charge per person. If you want dinner, also in that building complex is a very nice restaurant, Maurice. They spell it funny, but anyway. And I've tasted the food and I can attest to the fact that it's good. So for $10 you can get a dinner, kind of a box dinner, and then for $15 you can enjoy 2 hours of big band music and dance if you like, or just sit at a nice table and enjoy the atmosphere. Also, this Thursday, the City College Jazz Festival is taking place. So from 8 until 5 o'clock, there will be school groups performing in the theater at Fresno City College. There will be a guest artist performing. Those concerts used to happen in the evening. However, what happens is they really want the students to come to those concerts. Well, the students don't come back for those evening concerts. So Paul Lucchese's decided to put that concert at noon. So if you'd like to hear Sasha Berliner play vibraphone, she's a recording artist, and she'll be doing clinics for the kids, probably serving as an adjudicator, but also doing that concert at noon, Fresno City College Theater this Thursday, again, March 20th. Okay, now to what's behind me on the screen, hopefully, if my technology is working. I want to do some thank yous. Please hold your applause. So we want to thank the Woodward Park Library for providing this venue to us for free. We want to thank KFSR 90.7 Radio for doing our public service announcements, announcing Jazz at the Library. We want to thank the Woodward Park Friends of the Library who do sponsor us to some degree monetarily. I want to thank Bill Reeve for running our audio and video. Sandy Hedrick is our board member in back. If you have any questions about JazzFresno, or if you want to purchase merchandise, which we don't have here tonight, or you have any questions, period, ask Sandy. I want to thank KVPR Valley Public Radio. David Ouse on a Sunday jazz show always tries to tie some element of that show into our presentation here. And I want to thank the citizens of Fresno and the city of Fresno for the Measure P grant that we were granted, which helps us pay for Jazz at the Library to a small degree, but also helps us run our operation, even though the board members are not paid, and also helped with our youth percussion band, We Got the Beat, and also helped with our 20-piece Latin Jazz Fresno Big Band. Okay, so next, let's see if my technology works here. Boom, it looks like it worked. Did that slide magic, huh? Isn't that something? Okay. So, this is kind of our schedule for Jazz at the Library, April 18th. Raise your hand if you know who Ray Moore is. Yeah, I see like 3 hands, and these guys probably know Ray Moore. So, the reason I invited Ray to present here, one very talented musician, local Fresno guy, deserving of a lot wider recognition. He's a fan. First of all, he's just a lovely human being, but he's also a great drummer, and he's a great vocalist, and you can go on YouTube, if you know what you're looking for, you can find him. He's been doing performances with a group nationally, and even going on tour out of the country. But you're going to want to come and check out Ray Moore next month. 3rd Tuesday of the month, April 18th. May 20th, Rick Helzer and Mike Dana will present the music of Ralph Towner. This is June 5th, this is 95% confirmed that the Latin Jazz Fresno Big Band that performed in this room to a crowd the size of 184 people, so there's standing room in the back, and I know some people left because they didn't want to stand in the back. We will be doing another performance June 5th. It's 95% confirmed outside in this little area behind the library. So if you want to hear that band in this general vicinity and you had trouble getting into that performance or didn't like standing, bring a chair and come join us June 5th, and we'll let you know when that is confirmed. And then June 17th, Larry Honda and Tim Chagoyan will be coming back and doing a presentation here. Okay, technology, boom. Yes. So, this week, Friday, March 21st, on the Fresno Pacific University campus at the Workentine Culture and Arts Center, the Latin Jazz Fresno Big Band will be doing a free concert there. You're all invited. That start time is 7:30. That band will also be performing April 12th for Vintage Days on the Fresno State campus, and that performance is at noon, free, and it will be the west end, outside the west end of the music building. If you know the campus, just get there early. You probably won't have any trouble finding it, hopefully. Here's the next big ask right here. Did that change? No, it didn't. Boom. Now it changed. There's a venue, all good. So I, okay. Next, boom. Oh, went too far. Back, and go back. Back to be that way. Good. So, here's the deal. The Latin Jazz Fresno Big Band and its director, Steve Alcala, wants the band to perform at Arte Americas, which is the Cultural Arts Museum for the Hispanic population. So it seems very appropriate that a Latin Jazz Big Band would perform in that venue. Now, to run a venue, to maintain that museum and their outdoor property, which is where the performance would take place, it costs money. You would think when we tell people we're offering you a 20-piece big band for free, then they would say, okay, come on, no charge, but that's not the real world. So the real world is, it costs, you see that figure that's there, it costs more than double that in order to rent that venue. So they have offered it to us for this fee, which is a greatly reduced price, partly because Steve Alcala used to be the chairman of Arte Americas. So the problem is, we don't have that kind of money in the budget. The people who wrote the grant, in all of their wisdom, didn't think, because it's our first grant that we've done in this group of board members, they didn't think about putting money in the budget for rental of a venue. So, if we can get like 1,600 of your friends to contribute $1, then we can pay for that rental. Or, if everybody in the room puts in $20, that might cover it, or 4 people can put in $400 a piece, or you can do the math. So, what's going to happen, either we'll come up with the money and we'll do this concert on the 31st, or we won't come up with the money and we'll just tell them, look, we're going to give you back your date on the 31st and rent it out to someone else, or something in between. So, the choice is yours. If you think you know somebody that has deep pockets that wants to help with that, see Bill or Sandy or talk to me. Now I see Bill is trying to help me with another thing, which is we get to do a quarterly report on our grant and so forth. And so we have the survey. If you've looked around the room and see these QR codes, if you're familiar with QR codes on your phone, what this will do is if you use your photo mechanism on your phone and put it to that QR code, it will take you to a website that allows you to fill out the survey. It's anonymous. It tells us a lot of what we need to give to the report that we're going to do. Bill, is there something better that you can tell me that's going to, no?
Just that we're required to help them understand how the grant money is impacting how the arts are consumed in the city. So they just want to get an idea of where people live roughly and who's coming out. So it's all anonymous. There's no information that would tie you personally to the survey. It's just like 10 or 12 questions. It's really pretty easy. And if you haven't used QR codes before, I'd be happy to help you. But it helps us a lot because I have to do a quarterly report. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, so if you got in here early, you've already seen the screen behind me, which tells you a little bit about Tom. And I'm going to just hit some of the highlights. Of course, Tom graduated from Fresno State in 2011 and got his BA in jazz performance under the tutelage of Dr. Michael Caldwell. He's played lead trumpet for several award-winning ensembles and for some of the Valley's largest jazz groups, such as the Latin Jazz Ambassadors, Fresno City College Jazz Band, Fresno State Jazz Orchestra, and the Jazz Composers Orchestra. He's a founding member of the Viper City Jazz Band and was founded in 2003. And since 2006, he's been the leader of the band. He thinks that he and the band owe a debt of gratitude to Dave Ruffner and the Blue Street Jazz Band. That was a local band, and Dave was a band director that really fostered a lot of traditional jazz in the high schools, in his high school, Fresno High School. So Dave was a big influence on this band and adopting the New Orleans funk and traditional jazz style. So without further ado, I give you Thomas Lake.
All right, everybody here is okay? Good, good. So on that note, on the hearing part, we're not subtle at all. So again, right up front, I'm sorry, it is going to be maybe louder than you're used to hearing a band. We're going to try to play to the room and not, try to reorganize the atoms in the wall like we have before in other places. So, yeah, like he was saying, we do owe a big debt of gratitude to Blue Street. I met Kevin Hill, who's our fabulous tuba player. Maybe one of the greatest bass players I've ever heard and played with in my entire life. I met Kevin when I was 14 and he was playing in Swing Gate, that's the one. He was playing at Swing Gate and I was playing in a band called the Raisin Babies. It was a youth band that Dave Ruffner created at Fresno High. And there was a youth band circuit at the time, and Ed Hull was running Swingin' Gate at the time. And through the Raisin Babies, Ryan Brunkhorst came years after me playing trombone in the band. And then we were all kind of indoctrinated into Dixieland. And somewhere along the lines in like 2002-ish, we started listening to this band from New Orleans called the Nightcrawlers. And that kind of lit a fire under us. And we had already heard some of the players in that band, a phenomenal tuba player named Matt Perrin, early on. And so we kind of had the bug, and this started via that. Really, we just wanted to have fun on a Mardi Gras, and we did. And 22 Mardi Gras later, that's still happening pretty religiously. Every March, I start freaking out about dates and calendars and everything. Yeah, it's a great time. So, what a brass band is. These bands largely started post-Civil War. So Civil War ended 1865. This is going to be the small history portion of this. So 1865, Civil War ends. There's a lot of, from the bands and marching bands and wartime bands and the people that learned instrumentation or playing instruments during that time, the freed folk, post-Civil War, started creating these bands that were pretty much used almost exclusively for funerals by these social groups that were created in the New Orleans area. They're used for funeral dirges and for processionals and weddings and just a lot of events. Pretty much nothing's changed because we do that now to this day. That's pretty much the first bands were getting gigs the same way we get gigs, which is kind of fun. So they started doing that, and then the advent of brass bands really changed after about 1893 when that was made. So the tuba traditionally is like a sit on your lap kind of monster, top-facing bell. You might have seen them in orchestras. The poor guy's got to sit there hugging this thing for hours on end. John Philip Sousa commissioned the production of that instrument, the sousaphone, because it had a forward-facing bell so it could project. and you could wear it versus hold it, because you can imagine marching down the street doing this with a 60-pound instrument, unforgivingly, not fun. So they put it on your shoulder, and it's a lot easier, although still pretty challenging. So the band's changed from that point on, and what we're going to play first is kind of an example of some of the early dirges that you might have heard at a funeral. They'd be doing this leaving to the grave site, and it was kind of a slower tune, pretty somber, usually in a minor key. And then leaving the funeral, they would play a different kind of tune. We'll show you that after. But for the first one, we'll play this is a very common standard in jazz. It's called St. James Infirmary. We're going to do it in a kind of a more Dixieland setup, which would be a trumpet, sometimes two, a clarinet, trombones, just kind of tailgating the melody. So you'll hear one of us play the melody, and then the tuba kind of picks it up. But you'll see how this goes. So you can see the nature of that type of song, right? So, you know, everybody's got to remember stuff, not the most happy of moments. And it was to symbolize what everybody was going through and kind of giving them a vehicle for their pain that they were dealing with at this, you know, pretty sad time. So leaving the funeral, you might hear some celebrationals. And those would be songs that you'd be familiar with, church hymns that had been taken from guys that could read post-Civil War, from your church music, from piano church music, things that were previously arranged, and then also from learning from the cadences that they learned in the music, from military music and developing tunes and writing them. You also get spiritual hymns like I'll Fly Away, very, very common tune, very common Baptist tune. Or you would hear something like the song we're going to play now, also in a kind of a Dixieland-ish version. And then you'll be very familiar, this one is the Saints Go Marching In. So very common tunes you might hear. So as a Dixieland band, it might be something like this, Leaving the Funeral. So. So there's a couple elements that took place right there, right? So you might have heard some improvising. You guys that are part of JazzFresno, you're kind of aware what improvisation is. That's where we're following the framework of a song, the chordal structure of a song, and then kind of improvising our own melodies based around that and somewhat based around the melody itself. And in the middle of that, you would notice that when somebody is improvising, one thing that's really indicative of this music would be these kind of ad hoc backgrounds that we do, where you might have seen me just kind of lean over to Max and just like skeletally sing something to him really quickly, and then we all just, in a moment's notice, grab that suggestion and then quickly harmonize it under that framework of the chord structure. And what that kind of provides us is it provides the soloist with some background energy. So otherwise it would be kind of vapid. You know, you just have the bass drum and the tuba playing. There wouldn't be much going on really. So we kind of support the soloist with that. And then we also had this other thing that happens and the outro of that before I reintroduce the melody, which everybody knows. When the saints. We did this thing called collective improvisation, which is something that is indicative of both Dixieland and brass band music. While we do have a structure to what we're doing, there are spaces that are set up where we can embellish the melody, we can embellish our sections. There are little phrase holes that take place that we fill with artistic expression based on that framework of that song, right? So we did that in that song, and you can see kind of it's almost like a controlled chaos, right? It's a little bit wild. It's not quite so structured as like a big band tune like Glenn Miller. You might hear something very tight with that band, or Basie or Ellington. And it's not so free-formed like absolute free jazz where there's kind of no rhythm going on and everybody's expressing themselves that way. It is both loose, chaotic, and structured, and we all have roles in that band. So post the advent of that instrument, we went to more structured New Orleans jazz and street funk, where these groups were educating themselves, were teaching themselves rhythms, the rhythms that were flowing from the native areas, literally the Native Americans of that region in New Orleans. Lots of influence was coming from the South, from the Caribbean, a lot of influence even upstream, up the Mississippi. I mean, you could take Dixieland chord structure, and if you travel upriver, then you're going to get to bluegrass pretty quick. And if you take bluegrass and you compare them to Dixieland, or what we call trad jazz now, they're not very different. I mean, one is quite a bit faster, being bluegrass sometimes. But they're very similar, and so a lot of that influence got, just bled out to different parts of the country, and particularly in that region. And there was a place in New Orleans called Congo Square, where a lot of the, at one time, a lot of the enslaved people or people that had just recently been freed would gather freely to play their own traditional music, their own traditional beats, and that was everybody from Native Americans to former slaves and freed folk. And they would gather, and that influence bled into each other and created these rhythms. And the byproduct of that was this brass band rhythm, what we kind of know now as second line, or what some people would hear as what we call the hand jive beat a little bit. It's also, in Latin music, it's one of the two major claves, right? There's the Latin clave, there's the 3-2, it's, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, okay? Or there's the 2, 3, which is, the other one stuck in my head now, sorry. But backwards, And so those rhythms, there's a reason why those rhythms are found in almost every art form that humans can produce in music. You'll find those rhythms somewhere. It's because most of them came from native folk, and they all came from your heartbeat. Your heartbeat is a double pulsed syncopated rhythm, right? And so all those beats kind of stem from the heartbeat, and that's why there's like an international beat that you can find in all music. It's you'll hear it in Indian music, you'll hear it in European music, Native American music, African music, Caribbean. It's everywhere because it's kind of inside of us, So what we got out of that was this hand jive beat. Ed, can you play me a street view real quick? So that's second line stuff, right? The second line, that street beat. The second line was the line of dancers just behind the procession that was going on. And so they would do freeform dance to the rhythms that were being played by usually a band. And most of the time, I mean, if you see them now, you won't just see like this kind of collective of instruments. You'll see, it'll be a lot of people from like neighborhoods. It won't just be one sousaphone, it might be like 7. Because in New Orleans, you know, it's a different, kind of a different vibe there. They don't play street ball, they make small brass bands in their neighborhoods. So, you know, when there's a big funeral like, when Tuba Fats died, or you know, this last couple of years ago, I mean, it would be a street full of people. There might be 14 trumpet players. There's a slew of trombone players, and Reed's somewhere, but nobody can really hear him on the street. Sorry, Otto. And tuba players just, you know, strung out everywhere, because it's just part of their culture there. And so we really dug onto the culture and became and enjoyed it. We've since, brass bands have changed since then. The instrumentation has largely stayed the same, but the way we approach the music has been very different. Because when you just approached it right now, and what we saw is we have the head of the tune, you know, whereas the melody, ba ba ba, da 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 da, right? That's the melody, the second line written by Paul Barber. I can't remember when that was written, but it was quite a long time ago. That melody, then we have a solo section after that, and you'll hear a little call and response to that, right? I'll go ba da 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 da, you know. So we have a structured role in the band. There's the call and response that's a big part of you know, the cultural phenomenons that were taking place at the time and the advent of the music. And then you also have a solo section where guys are, like I said before, improvising. And then we're providing a structure underneath and support underneath to help the musician guide them and guide their energy where it's going. And so that same kind of element just kept going in time. And we got more and more progressive bands, as music often does, right? It changes, it mutates, it becomes something else. And brass bands, the collective of how they're constructed stayed the same, but the music itself did change. And so where we have more funk elements, more chordal density, and that we're going to give you some examples of that right now. This is a song played quite a bit in New Orleans now, and has become somewhat of a New Orleans standard. And so it's got kind of a hip hop foundation, that same heavy 2 and 4. With still a lot of horns. And what we did, and the one element that did change, along with the sousaphone from tuba to sousaphone, was Otto now will be playing the tenor saxophone, which is, in the brass band, they are considered part of the brass band, even though they are technically a woodwind. Although there's arguably more brass on the instrument than there is wood. It's pretty much a brass instrument. But what it really is another tenor voice, right? So he's a tenor voice, they're all tenor voices, he's a bass voice, and we're both quasi-alto soprano voices. And so what we get is an extension of the voicing that's taking place. And that's an important thing for us, because what do you not see in our band? What do you not see?
Singers, vocalists.
Singers for sure, although that's embarrassingly sometimes me. Chord instruments, right? No bass, although we got this guy who does it. Although he has played bass sometimes, a couple times, bass and tuba, which is very impressive. And he sings while playing too. It's something. It's impossible. Yeah, tuba is the bass though. And so we do not have a chording instrument. That means we rely on the voices of this brass band, because we don't have somebody chunking chords behind us. And we don't have anybody throwing down like what we call 4 on the floor, you know, just chunk, 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 establishing that rhythm. We have to be the effective fingers of the piano player when they're playing a solo. Otherwise, like I said before, it becomes kind of vapid and empty. And while there is a time for that emptiness, usually when the soloist is starting to play, we'll give them a moment to start to express themselves. Then we kind of come up and start guiding them and kind of following them on their journey, wherever that's going to go. It often goes in weird places, but there's jazz. And so we're going to play a song right now, Blues for Ben. And this is a modern take on a blues. It's got a pretty different, if you're used to jazz chords or you know about chords in general, this has a flat 5 instead of just a regular 5. Even if you don't know what that is, it's going to be pretty obvious when it does happen. And you'll see us do that. When a soloist starts to blow, we'll kind of get behind them and we'll support that journey, and we use chordal density to do that. And you'll see, so I hope you enjoy Blues for Ben. So yeah, that's Blues for Ben. And you'll notice that kind of sour note at the end of the phrase there. That is the flat five I was telling you about. And then we did some of the stuff that makes our band unique. So with a lot of brass bands, everybody has their own style. You know, there's bands now all over the place. There's guys up north in Wisconsin, which seems crazy because it is. But you know, it's pretty far removed from New Orleans. Of course, so are we. But up there in the cold, they have some really killer bands. There's the Youngblood Brass Band that's up there. There's Mama Dig Down that's up there. There's a bunch of really good bands that are in that area. And then pretty much from there, you can circle down from New York, where there's bands like Too Many Zoos, or some of the really hot street bands that are out there. Brass and Grass is another one that's out there that's awesome. You swing down and you get a lot of them approaching New Orleans. In everywhere from Virginia all the way down, and in New Orleans there's so many bands. I mean, they're just innumerable, and those bands all influence as well, and everybody kind of has their unique style, where you hear bands like the Hot Eight do a lot of hip hop, where they use a lot of modern contemporary music influences, and then they reorganize those tunes to fit basically marching band instrumentation. And so we kind of do the same thing, but you know, to speak of the musicality in the band, I've been really lucky. You know, I've been doing this band for 22 years and leading it since '06. And as I was thinking back to the history of everybody that's been in this band, I mean, it's been a who's who of just absolute beasts. And I've been really, really lucky to be a part of it and to share the stage with all these guys. Every one of them are monsters. Their musicality is so high. And what that has done for us in our own particular style is we've developed a sound where we play the head of the tune, which you've heard before, and when we get to the solos, oftentimes our music starts to mutate, and that's where we have kind of created our own sound, where we start to stray away from the song a little bit and gravitate into other songs and allow that to take place. And you'll see kind of the composition of the tunes that I'm talking about here. We're going to play right now a song called Bourbon Street Parade. And Bourbon Street Parade is a very traditional tune. It's a very traditional Mardi Gras New Orleans tune. It's just a New Orleans standard in general, trad jazz standard. And in fact, Otto, if you want to grab the clarinet, we're going to play through the head real quick of the tune in the traditional style, just so you can hear the difference, which is pretty extreme. So you'll hear this. This is the traditional version of Bourbon Street Parade. Now, we won't play the entirety through all the solos and everything, but I'll just give you an understanding of what the head sounds like with that, okay? So it's mostly like all this. Yeah. So, here you go. Collective improvisation kind of going on at the same time. Otto's playing, he's kind of twinkling over the changes with clarinet loveliness, which is by far and away the hardest instrument to play in the band. He's playing tailgate trombone, they're both doing that, which is kind of creating their own counter melody to what the actual melody is. Max is harmonizing with me, who's carrying the top melody. So that is kind of what you would hear in a more traditional way of doing Bourbon Street Parade. So we took that song, now listen for that melody that you had to endear my singing through, and you'll hear that melody in this rendition, and then we're gonna go places. And here's the funny thing, whenever we play, and this is no joke, whenever we play, like, we have only kind of an idea of what's gonna happen. Like, we know the melody, we know how we're gonna get in the fight, and how the fight's gonna end mostly. There's a caveat mostly, big asterisk right there. And then everything in the middle is kind of subject to change. There's a lot of audibles taking place. And so you might see me like do things like this, which is means like one more time, or keep going, or we'll turn to each other and play some kind of something under the breath. Or you'll see me do this with a 3 times tag at the end, which is what we did right there at the end. Or that, which is the universal sign for we're about to stop. And then it's whether or not I remember to do that at the right time. And these guys are usually there to support me. So another thing about having high musicality in the band is that I can rely on them to pick up the slack when my brain's not there. So you'll hear our version of Bourbon Street Parade and just listen for the weirdness and the fun stuff. Here we go. So you can see how, we took that tune and kind of restructured the song a little bit. So we had the melody take place, we have solos take place, we have an interlude between solos that lets us know kind of the end is near and somebody else is going to be stepping in. We try to do changes on the fly, me leaning over to Kevin telling him let's just push through the changes without the interlude. And then there's special sections like that where we're setting up multiple tonalities at the same time. So this is a slightly granular portion of the show. So we're setting up kind of this polychordal situation where we have the melody and a lick that's being done by Max and I, and these guys are playing counterpoint to our lick, and then Kevin is kind of walking up the chromatic scale a bit. And what that does is it creates tension. And so it allows whoever's blowing over that area, whether it be trombones playing in the holes of the phrases, whether it's Otto getting ready to go into a solo or coming out of one or in the middle of one, we kind of create that tension because we don't have, like you said before, piano and guitar. So we have to use these tools and these elements to create that tension as a band to make it a more interesting thing for everybody else. Because what happened is what actually just took place. We got back to the melody and everybody kind of goes, oh, I forgot we were playing that song. And sometimes that's us. We forgot we were playing that song. That's happened kind of more than once over the years. Where we went like, what was the source? When did we start playing?
We traveled far.
Yes.
We do not remember.
Yeah, we traveled far. We do not remember where we started. So everybody in the band has roles, right? So very briefly, the role of Max and I would be mostly to carry the melody, mostly. Now, because trombones are fantastic instruments, so are saxophones, we share the melody duties on certain tunes or certain parts of the tunes, or maybe we played the verse and they played the bridge or something to that effect. And then Otto can give you a brief description of kind of what his role as a saxophone player is in the band. So, Otto Lee.
Yeah, so the clarinetist, saxophonist typically is improvising, which makes it easy for me because I don't have to know the melody. I can just, as long as my ears are working, I can kind of fit in, and that's traditionally what the role has been. Yeah, it's called the obligato. So when you listen to those traditional records, you really never hear the clarinetist playing the melody, unless it's Sidney Bechet, because Sidney Bechet was like, I'm the man, I'm playing the melody. Which, he could do what he wanted to, he's Sidney Bechet. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm just kind of filling in the space, trying to create interest, not trying to step on the toes of the person playing the melody, but at the same time, just keeping the energy up and just playing what's appropriate for the tune.
So yeah, he does, that is, I've always been secretly jealous of that part because they just kind of get to artistically, paint with us the whole time while we have some more rigid rules and but without them, again, it would be very vapid sounding. So we're so used to this guy outlining the chord structure because we don't have a piano player tinkling some hip stuff behind, we have, he's like the right hand of the piano. And then these guys would be more of the left hand of the piano, typically supporting roles and tailgate. So you want to talk about tailgate trombone? So this is Brian Brunkhorst. We refer to him as Brunk most of the time, but here he is.
Nothing about this. So tailgate, it's kind of like just reacting to what these guys are doing while the reeds are doodling. That's how I think of it in my head, And sometimes I'm playing some bass parts or trying to, going up and down scales, or I'm just, it's call and response really is my role. You do some funky stuff, fill in those gaps, really listening for other things. I think this band, the toughest part is we're all horn players, and occasionally we'll play the same note, I'll play the third, you'll play the third. I'm like, oh crap, I'll play the fifth, and we'll play the fifth. And the tenor will come in and do the same thing. We're like, okay, we're just like a bop band now, playing the same notes. But yeah, you're kind of holding down the weight of the band in a way, like in a tradition, in a trad Dixieland band, trombone's kind of the tailgate, right? You're bringing it up from behind. Not as much the bass, but I mean, you're more heard, I would say. And occasionally let us, play the melody and do cool stuff. I don't know if we're playing anything.
So the story of the tailgate trombone, why they call it tailgate trombone playing.
I forgot.
So, let me just help you. Okay. The reason why they call it tailgate trombone playing is because the band, since they had instruments, a lot of times would get helped out and they would put them on a cart or a truck. Okay? In order that they didn't have to walk the many miles while also playing. So the trombone player
I've done it a few times, yeah.
sit on the tailgate. And then they go, right? So tailgate trombone, they sit down on the tailgate. Literally why they.
All these guys got the reading, and I forgot all this stuff about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so that brings my notes. And that's so Kevin, his relationship in the band is largely connected to the sousaphone and the bass drum. Now I have this bass drum up there, even though we haven't used it, because some of the traditional brass band stuff would be we'd have Ed with a. We're nice enough not to have our drummers have to do it very often, but wear a snare on the hip. You've seen the guy walking with the snare on the hip, horrendously comfortable, always well known. It's a known comfortable thing to do. And so we try not to have them do any of that stuff. And then you'd have a guy wear a harness. This bass drum does have a harness for it, and it's also excessively comfortable to wear, especially long distances. It becomes more comfortable as the miles go on. Yeah, no padding, just ruthless, absolutely no regard for anything, just the sound, everybody's experience over our health and safety. And so, but the relationship typically is connected between the sousaphone and the bass drum. They have a kind of joint relationship, and Kevin being an exceptional tuba player and sousaphone player, and Ed being an exceptional drummer, works well almost all the time. So, Kevin, you want to talk about the sousa?
Yes.
Kevin Hill.
Okay, so what Tom had clapped earlier is in Spanish called the tercero rhythm. It's three, just a grouping of three, right? And it's from all over, but it can be generally traced back to the Yoruba tribe in Africa because of the slave trade, it being brought to the bottom of Brazil, and then coming all the way up New Orleans on the Caribbean and Gulf portion of that trade. So that was what happened there. You end up with the traditional beat in New Orleans being quite similar, to the one from Puerto Rico, the one from Cuba, and the one from Haiti, and the one from the Dominican Republic, all because of the tragedy of said slave trade. So once people were freed, it is good that we had this music, but we also have to consider that these were African people who were brought against their will. And that culture did beautifully and wonderfully mix with all the other cultures, and is the reason why we play most of the music we play today, and why we listen to most of the music we listen to. So anyway, the bass part of that. Originally, the Yoruba rhythm was in a 6/8, right? So. Right, and then we got some places, depending on what you're doing, and then, okay? And then reggaeton or something else would have just both threes at their center. Okay, so we're doing a 3/2, basically, in its essence. You can see it as a Latin rhythm, right? You can see it as a lot of things. I see it as an African rhythm inherently. And it changed because the people there were different and all kinds of different stuff happened for like hundreds of years. So in New Orleans, the tradition, Congo Square, it's where it started. The tuba was the bass instrument. Why? Because it's loud, because they're on the street, right? So you don't have electric instruments. Upright bass wasn't gonna work. Tuba works great, bass drum works great, drums, urban rhythms, here we go.
So that was the relationship between those two, and they kind of follow each other. So, so we're gonna play now. What we've done and what brass bands have done now, as I'm trying to be conscious of the time here. What brass bands have done now is they've adopted modern hip hop beats to that rhythm, and the relationships have largely stayed the same. So these two are still together. The drummers. So they're a hoot. So we're gonna go through and play this tune written by the Youngblood Brass Band of Madison, Wisconsin. They are absolute monsters, monsters of their craft, incredible players, incredible tuba player in the band, and so we play some of their charts because I got a great tuba player. Why wouldn't you do that? So we're going to play a tune called Brooklyn, and this is a lot more modern tune. You're going to hear a lot of those rhythmic elements and where it's going to go, and then we have a couple more for you before we call it a night, and I'll show you what those are too. So here is Brooklyn. So that was a pretty good example of like some of the shenanigans that happened. So about part of the way through the Brooklyn solo, I was like, well, I want to take this somewhere and show this part of the elements of our music. And so I kind of figured a relative key change that would be, I mean, what would a key change, C minor to C minor. Yeah, I mean that's a way we approach a lot of our music. So in the uniqueness of our particular group, that is an element that we kind of foster and we want to grow from and into. Anytime we approach a song, we try to think of what would be a cool background, what would grab the audience engagement. And our idea is, at least in our philosophy of our sound in particular, since I've had to kind of codify it over the last week or so, would be, we have a source material that we start with. And like Kevin said, we go a great many journeys. So of that source material, we kind of loop out and go to something else. And, maybe it's because in the background we heard somebody playing the hits from a pop tune and Kevin decides to play the bass line from said pop tune. And now Otto, in the middle of his solo, decides to play the head from that pop tune. Now we're not playing the old song anymore. We have ventured off into the great unknown, sort of. And then we kind of circle back. And when we do circle back, sometimes we pass the source material and head off on another weird tangent, mostly on accident. And then when we come back, that's when the audience has that moment of like, oh my God, I didn't know these guys were going to do that. We didn't either. And so, that's both the fun part of this band. I've never known a single player to play in this band that didn't love it, that got done and like, this is a hoot. I mean, Joseph never played in the brass band before this year, right? Never done it? Last year, yeah. Jeez.
Now he is.
Now he is. Now it's
22 years.
Now we're passing the D's off. And that's kind of happened with everybody that's been in the band. Everybody like kind of gets the bug and like feels the fun. I've never left a brass band gig without a smile. Everybody's always in good sorts, albeit a little more tired than when we started. But yeah, that is the element of our band that we like to carry forward. So what we'd like to do is kind of, like any art form, you want to spread the art form. We want to show young trombone players and young tuba players that, because growing up, if you play this old-timey wind-powered set of pipes over here or there, or that thing, what do we call it? Two bends and a slide. It's just, it's one of the oldest instruments on the bandstand right now next to the drum. And so, where do you land on that? When you're listening to hip hop and pop and contemporary music, where do you land? Where do you belong? Where do you belong as a sousaphone player or as a trombone player or a trumpet player? And brass band music has always been that really enriching thing for us because we can take just almost any tune that we like and we can just make it into us, and our art form. Or maybe that tune doesn't have a lot of substance. Maybe it just belongs as a background or a simple segue or something that connects, an interesting connection to another tune or to the source material it started with. So, Joe, do we have time for one more? Can I play one more song? All right. So we're going to play one more tune here. Yeah, I think we'll do you think we should just do Drug Boogie and just do the yeah, so we're going to play a real common tune. This is Cool in the Gang made this popular. And in fact, the guy, what's his name from the valley here? Thomas. The cat from Cool in the Gang. I can't remember his name ever. He's got my same name. No, Larry Giddens. Is it? It is Larry Giddens. My brain. Yeah, it is Larry Giddens. No. It is, right. So Larry Giddens wrote with Cool and Gang. He wrote this song Jungle Boogie, which is very popular and most everybody has heard it. And then we have one example of what I just explained. We had a tune that we liked that kind of fit mentally, but it wasn't enough to give it an entire song, so we just kind of placed it where we could place it. And so you'll see how we did this, and this is our last song for the night. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, JazzFresno, Joe Lozama, everybody for being so welcoming and enjoying this crazy loud art form that we've been really digging on for the last 20 years plus. And it's a lifetime disease at this point. It's in us now. No vaccine for this. All right, so this is Jungle Boogie, and we are the Viper City Brass Band. Thank you. Also, before we start this tune, I'm just quick at everybody in the band. Saelee on the trombone. Ryan Brunkhorst on the trombone as well. I want to give a special shout to Ed Murray. Ed's a phenomenal drummer. He's an irregular regular with us, but is gracious enough to show up at the drop of a hat when we have a situation and playing with us in gigs in general. He's an absolute monster and a gem of the Valley drumming. Ed Murray on the drums. The incomparable and longtime sousaphone player, bass playing extraordinaire, educator. This guy, if you could think of a cornerstone of music in the Central Valley, I can't think of somebody. That's this guy, that's it. That's Kevin Hill. He plays everything I need to. He's an absolute beast. Got to do it, If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So. Hembd. Max has been playing with me since.
So I remember when you started this band, we played in the City College Jazz Band together, Fresno City College Jazz Band. Tom pulled me over to his apartment, had some CDs. I'm gonna start this band. And I left for a number of years, and I came back, and sure enough, the band was going real strong. My first gig was a gumbo cook-off, and he pulled me over by the porta potties and teach me all the songs right before the gig.
There's no line.
It's been like 12 years now. So
I think
been in there.
maybe even more than that. But yeah, that is dead accurate. Dr. Otto Lee. Otto is a monster in the Valley, playing all these, being an incredible educator. I met Otto at Fresno State, playing in the jazz band with him. We've been fast friends ever since. He's been playing in the brass band like 12, 13 years now, something like that, long time, maybe even longer than that. But just a spectacular human being, and a wonderful educator, and again, another gem of the Valley, of all the gems I get to play with. So, Dr. Otto. And you guess it, I'm Thomas Lake. This has been my band. I'm super lucky. I'm super lucky to play with these guys. It's a gift and a pleasure every single time. And without their musicality, I don't know what we would do. We certainly just wouldn't have a band as excellent and fun as this is. So enjoy it. I hope it nurtures your soul. It certainly nurtures ours. And in a world that is seemingly coming apart at the seams from time to time, it's good to have this kind of thing that gives us a purpose and a drive and something beautiful to look forward to. And the best part about all these art forms, jazz and music in particular, is we are trying to evoke an emotion. We're trying to transfer the joy that this music gives to us to all of you guys in the best way that we can, which is through these like old-timey bent tubes and antiquated instruments that we know so very well, that we struggle with daily. So I hope you all enjoy that. I hope it nurtures your soul like it does ours, and enjoy our last tune, Jungle Book. of it, but it's super fun to throw in this song. So we're the Viper City Brass Band. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Keep your eyes open in Fresno when we're posting stuff. We'll try to make it as known as we possibly can. We'll see you next time. Thank you, JazzFresno.